Hello, everybody, and welcome to Nathan on Shuffle and to my latest episode of New Album Spotlight, the show where I put the spotlight on a new album in progressive rock or related genres that I want to talk about that's getting some kind of buzz. And today I've got a really good one for you today. It's actually an EP, so a short album by a band that I absolutely love. And of course, this is Haken and their new EP, In a Fever Dream. Haken's been one of my favorite prog metal bands for a long time. I first heard them with their first album, Aquarius, back in 2010, and have followed them ever since, and they just have become increasingly more and more of a favorite in my collection. Visions was their next album, which absolutely floored me. The Mountain, to me, is the peak of their discography. I just love everything they did on it. Affinity is much to the same quality level and dabbling their toes a little bit into an 80s aesthetic. Then they did the more heavier, more djent style albums Vector and Virus, and their more recent record is Fauna from 2023. That's their last record, which to me kind of brought back a little bit of the old school progginess, but still kept intact the heavier gentiness of Vector Virus. So to me, it was a good culmination of everything that the band had done up to that point, plus some signposts to some newer sounds that they were experimenting with at the time. So I was a really big fan of it. I know some people are a bit more mixed, but I think overall it got a pretty positive reception. But since that album, they've had some lineup shifts. They've lost a couple members recently. Earlier this year, I believe it was announced that Charlie Griffiths and Connor Green have left the band, who are big members who've been with the band for a long time. So it's dialed down to a four-piece, and they're just sticking with the four of them, which is Ross Jennings on vocals, Richard Hinshaw on guitars, Ray Hearn on drums, and Pete Jones on keyboards. So they're a slimmed-down lineup, and probably the big headline for this release is that it was co-produced and mixed by George Lever, who's done albums with Loathe and Sleep Token, and features bass contributions from Brian Beller and Adam Nolly Getgood. And you can hear these influences in this music. It's much more modern style production values, very much in similar vein as Sleep Token. I was also thinking of Tesseract and Modern Leprous. It's kind of the direction a lot of these prog metal bands are going, to sound a bit more electronic based, care a lot about the production, bringing in sounds from different modern genres like R&B and electronic music and pop music and all these different areas to craft something that feels a little bit more modern, that feels like it fits in today's musical landscape rather than delving backwards into, the past of music. So, which, is providing some mixed results. I think some fans who are more into the proggier Haken of old, who did Aquarius and did kind of the circusy prog music and Gentle Giant sounds and all that kind of stuff, are maybe missing a bit of that spark in the band nowadays, where they're streamlining their sound quite a bit more and getting rid of a lot of those classic prog sounds that were in the early records. And some people are embracing it. Some people really like their new direction, that it sounds like they're kind of, bringing in some fresh takes and doing something different and experimental and still staying relevant in the modern music landscape rather than sticking to this old style of music that's becoming increasingly out of date. So I stand somewhere in the middle. Of course, my heart lies in the old school classic prog. That's what I talk about on the channel mostly. So I love those classic prog influences from their early records. And I like the Dream Theater style prog that they had throughout their, early to middle career. That's basically my favorite sound. But once I fall in love with a band, I'm willing to go on the journey with them. And I like Haken, how they experiment, how they're willing to try new sounds and new styles. So I'm all on board in hearing this little interesting new experiment with the band and this statement of where they are at now. And I think that's a big piece of what this EP is just showcasing what this group can do now that they've kind of solidified this group of four and have gotten rid of some members that maybe brought in a lot of those classic older school sounds from metal and prog. And now we've got this kind of interesting new path for the band, and we'll see if they take this direction, if they bring back elements from older records or embrace something totally different on their next record. But it's an interesting signpost to where the band may be headed. You heard a little bit of this, I think, in Fauna and stuff like Alphabet of Me and Taurus. You hear some of those kind of more modernish, sounds bleeding into their music. That was a cool, fascinating influence that they really took further into this EP. And I'm kind of glad this is a EP. At first I was disappointed when they started teasing music and releasing singles. I was hopeful that it would be a full-length record and that I'd be able to dive into this cool new record from them. But I think an EP works really well for this style sound. I think it might have been fatiguing to the ears to hear this in a longer format, and maybe it's cool to get a little bite-sized piece of this direction that they're interested in, and maybe on the next full-length Haken record they can be a bit more varied and experimental and bring back some of those classic prog influences and classic metal influences, and do something a little bit more eclectic. But for this, they kind of streamlined into one specific style that they're interested in, and I think it's a very cohesive, interesting piece of music that grows on me without over time. I wanted this review to be more about my experience with the record and listening to it, and my kind of reaction to the other people's opinions that I've seen online and other reviewers and people who've been a bit mixed on this record, instead of going song by song and talking about all the little moments throughout the tracks. So for me, the singles, I wasn't too blown away by any of the singles when I first heard them. I thought they were okay, but I was hoping they were kind of one-off, different kinds of songs, and the full record would showcase, more disparate styles and more prog influences and things. I was increasingly concerned about what the direction would be. But once I heard that it was an EP, and once I heard the piece in full and heard it as one cohesive piece of music, I thought it really gelled well together and made a lot more sense. So for me, I know other people have kind of the opposite opinion that I've talked to, but for me, I think this works better as a full EP, like front to back, listening to the full record, rather than pulling out the individual singles and parts, because I feel a cohesion here. I think Haken does this really well. All their records feel very cohesive and thematic, and even if they don't have, a complete narrative thread, they have a style and sound that binds all the songs together into one piece of music. So, and I feel like this is the same way. In a Fever Dream, the opening track, and Lotus, which is the final track, to me are the highlights of the record. It's bookended by, and they're the two lengthiest tracks. They're 7 minutes long and have more room to breathe and to expand. And I feel like Lotus is a perfect complement to In a Fever Dream, because it calls back some of the lyrics and, some of the themes of the record, and ends in a very interesting way, where In a Fever Dream is very dark and melancholy and dramatic. I think Lotus ends with a little bit of an anthemic, hopeful feel after this bit of a darker record. But the middle songs in between are all interesting as well. Delirium is probably my least favorite track of the track list, a little bit more generic and just traditional alternative sound to it. But there's some really catchy bits and some fun vocal moments from Ross Jennings. And, it's just a fun song to listen to and catchy. So I don't find any issue with it. It's just probably, if I had to pick the weakest track, that would be the one. Eclipse by You is more about the feel and the atmosphere, I think. More of a lighter kind of ballad-esque, but with darkness and interesting elements to it. Whereas Bleeding Sky is really cool, kind of, has the light and shade and different moments as well throughout the track list, and has a really unique and cool modern sound to it. But I like what they're going for in this record. Like I said, not many like super proggy moments to me, but they experiment with cool, interesting sound palettes and production, moments that they're toying with and experimenting with. I hear a lot of people talking about Ross Jennings' vocals, where they're very treated and have a lot of effects on them, which I think is indicative of the style. You know, you hear that in these other types of bands like Sleep Token. You know, sometimes they put effects and glitchiness and electronic elements into their sound. And I think it's done fairly well here, even though I really like Ross's like clear, you know, typical tone. So, you know, maybe I would have liked to hear his natural voice a little more here. But the moments where he does come through shine really brightly, and I really love it. So it's really interesting to me, the mixed opinions on this. Some people really like it. Some people think it's maybe the worst thing they've done. And, you know, you get stuff all throughout the spectrum. I think at the very least, it's an interesting record that's sparking a lot of discussion, and a lot of people are talking about it. And I just keep liking it more and more the more I listen to it. It just solidifies it. So once I like got over the initial shock of what kind of music they were going for on this release, I think I settled into like appreciating it and loving it for what it is. And, you know, as I've talked about on the channel, once I fall in love with a band, I'm kind of ride or die with that band. I'm willing to go along with them and their experimentations and the directions that they choose to go in. And who am I to say where the direction should take them? You know, I feel like it's a bit of an entitlement when fans talk about like, oh, I wish this was more like this album. I wish they went back to this sound. I wish they'd go away from this. Like, the band gets to decide what they're going to do. Like, that's the cool factor of following a band and who are creative and who are visionaries like Haken is. They get to decide what kind of new sounds they want to play with and what things they want to put on their albums. And of course, it's up to the listeners to decide if they like that or not, and if they're a fan or not. And it all comes down to personal taste. So maybe this album isn't perfectly lined up with my personal taste, but I appreciate what they're going for in the experiment, and I love the band enough to give them the benefit of the doubt and to check it out and, you know, be able to have my ears opened to something a little bit different. And, you know, I would say that this is probably, for me personally and my taste, the weakest release they've come out with. So I'm not saying this is like some mind-blowing, like, perfect thing in their discography. I still would probably say it's like my least favorite, but that only speaks to the brilliance of their whole catalog, that every album that they've put out has something really great in it. And I love and cherish each record, and I love and cherish this EP as well. But hope that they'll expand things a little bit more on their future records. They'll go back to some of those classic prog moments that I love so much, and do something a bit more varied and different on their next release. But for what this is, I think this was a great experiment, really fun time, and has some really cool parts to it that I've been enjoying. So that's my take on it. I think it's a really fine slice of modern alternative prog metal, and I think they've done a great job here and crafted something that the band members seem to all be proud of. And it's great to see that the band's continuing forward and not just folding it up because they lost a couple of key band members. That's the really key thing for me, is I want to see the band continue to have a drive to want to create more music and to be passionate about it. And I feel their passion on this record, and I think it comes through well. Even if it may not be to my particular taste necessarily, it's probably going to be the least like played record from their discography for my personal taste, but I really respect them and what they're going for here. And it's grown on me as I've listened more, and it's opened up my ears to kind of a new style that I wasn't super fond of. So I think that's really all you can ask for from great music. So thank you guys for joining me. Hopefully you appreciated this review that I did here. Let me know in the comments how you feel about the EP, which was released today. I believe I'm going to put out this review today so that it's very fresh and, you know, along with the release of the record. So please check it out if you haven't yet, if you're curious what this might sound like. I think it's actually better than certain people are giving it credit for. I think there's some really cool stuff on here. So thank you guys, and hopefully you'll catch me in a future episode. Bye everybody, enjoy the music.